I'm Jaden, an 18-year-old guy, and to say I've had a complicated relationship with my dad, Mark, would be the understatement of the century. Growing up, I always knew I wasn't his favorite. That title belonged to my half-brother Ryan, a 24-year-old golden child who could do no wrong in Mark's eyes. Me? I was the scapegoat, the backup plan, the one who got all the blame when things went south. Ryan came from Mark's first marriage to a woman named Denise, who left when Ryan was just a baby. She wasn't exactly a candidate for Parent of the Year, and Mark overcompensated for her absence by putting Ryan on a pedestal so high it practically touched the clouds. Then I came along, the product of Mark's second marriage to my mom, Lisa. Mom was an amazing woman, but unfortunately, she made one terrible choice: marrying Mark. Ryan had always been the center of the universe in our house. When I was younger, I tried to earn Mark's approval, but it was like playing a rigged game. Ryan was always the one with the bigger birthday parties, the nicer gifts, the constant praise. I got hand-me-downs, indifference, and, if I was lucky, a grunt of acknowledgement. When I turned 16, I stopped trying. Why bother when the outcome was always the same? By the time I was 18, I had one foot out the door. I'd planned my escape, graduate high school, get into college, and leave behind Mark's circus of dysfunction. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It all started one night when Mark called me into the living room. He had this weirdly cheerful look on his face, like he'd just won the lottery. "Jaden," he said, "I've got great news. Ryan and his family are moving in." At first, I thought I'd misheard him. "Wait, what?" I asked, trying to wrap my head around what he'd just said. Mark explained that Ryan, his wife Olivia, and their 2-year-old son Logan were going through a tough time and needed a place to stay. Turns out Ryan had lost his job because he couldn't bother to show up on time, and Olivia refused to work because she was a full-time mom. Instead of figuring things out like adults, they decided to move in with Mark. Naturally, Mark was thrilled. That alone would have been annoying, but it didn't stop there. "They'll need space," Mark continued. "Logan needs a nursery, and Olivia needs an office." I blinked. "So, where am I supposed to go?" Mark's grin didn't falter. "You're 18 now. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. "You're kicking me out. To make room for Ryan?" "It's not like that," Mark said, his voice suddenly defensive. "You're an adult now. This is a good opportunity for you to grow up." Grow up. I was still in high school, barely scraping by, trying to save up for college. I wasn't exactly in a position to start paying rent somewhere. But Mark didn't care. He gave me 2 weeks to pack my stuff and leave, and he wasn't kidding. When I tried to argue, he threatened to call the cops on me if I wasn't out by the deadline. 2 weeks later, I stood outside our house, my belongings stuffed into a few bags and boxes, watching as Mark barely glanced up from his phone. Ryan and Olivia hadn't even moved in yet, but I could already imagine the smug look on Ryan's face when he waltzed into my room. With nowhere else to go, I called my grandparents, my mom's parents, Ruth and James. They were furious when they heard what had happened. Ruth wanted to march over to Mark's house and give him an earful, but I convinced her it wasn't worth it. Mark was a lost cause. They came to pick me up, and I spent the next day packing. Mark didn't say goodbye. He didn't even pretend to care. He just stood there, arms crossed, looking annoyed that I wasn't moving fast enough. Ruth and James, on the other hand, were amazing. They welcomed me into their home without hesitation, giving me the kind of support Mark never could. Sure, commuting an hour to school every day wasn't ideal, but compared to the chaos of living with Mark, it was paradise. Still, I couldn't shake the anger and hurt. I'd been kicked out of my own house to make way for Ryan and his freeloading family. It was one of the lowest points in my life, but as it turns out, it was just the beginning. Life with my grandparents, Ruth and James, was peaceful. A strange word for me to use, honestly. I wasn't used to peace. Growing up in Mark's house, it was always chaos, blame, and walking on eggshells. Living with Ruth and James, though, it felt like stepping into a different world. Sure, the hour-long commute to school wasn't a dream, but they made it worth it. Ruth would wake up early to pack me lunch, and James always had some corny dad joke waiting for me when I got home. For the first time in forever, I could breathe. Meanwhile, back at Mark's house, the circus was officially in town. Ryan, Olivia, and their toddler Logan had moved in. I didn't hear much from Mark, which was a blessing, but my Aunt Karen, who lived nearby and loved gossip as much as she loved her morning coffee, made sure I was in the loop. "You won't believe this," Karen said during one of her updates. "Mark turned your old room into a nursery for Logan. He even bought new furniture, crib, toys, baby monitors, the works." I shouldn't have been surprised. Ryan and Olivia always got the royal treatment, but it still stung. When I was 12 and begged Mark for a skateboard, he told me it was too expensive. Now he was spending who knows how much to make sure Ryan's kid had the perfect setup. "Let me guess," I said, half joking. "Ryan and Olivia took the guest room?" "Of course," Karen replied with a laugh. "Mark's bending over backward to make sure they're comfortable. It's ridiculous." The favoritism didn't stop at redecorating. According to Karen, Mark was constantly bragging about how he was helping his family in their time of need. He conveniently left out the part where he'd kicked me out to do it. But as much as Mark doted on them, Ryan and Olivia's freeloading was starting to ripple out into the rest of the family. Karen mentioned that Mark had called her asking for money. "What for?" I asked. "Apparently supporting Ryan and Olivia is more expensive than he expected," Karen said with a snort. Classic Mark. Throw your kid out, then turn around and ask for help because your golden child can't get his life together. Mark even tried to rope Ruth into his mess. One night, she sat me down at the kitchen table looking furious. "Your father called today," she said. "He asked if I could loan him some money." I groaned. "What did you say?" "I told him no, of course," Ruth replied, shaking her head. "And I told him he should be ashamed of himself for throwing you out." I couldn't help but laugh. Ruth was sweet, but when she was mad, watch out. Mark apparently didn't take her rejection well. He accused Ruth of turning me against him, which was rich, considering he'd done that all on his own. Still, I thought I'd put Mark and Ryan out of my mind for good. I was focusing on school, saving for college, and trying to move forward. But life has a funny way of dragging you back into the drama, especially when you've got people like Mark and Ryan in your orbit. It wasn't long before the next wave of chaos hit. A few months had passed since I moved in with Ruth and James. Things were finally settling into a rhythm. School was busy, and I'd picked up a part-time job to save for college. It wasn't easy juggling everything, but I felt like I was making progress. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, a family friend who had been like a second father to me ever since my mom passed. "Marcus, hey Jaden, can we talk later? Something's come up, and I think you should know about it." At first, I didn't think much of it. Marcus and I kept in touch pretty regularly, so I figured it was a casual check-in. When we finally talked later that night, though, I realized this was anything but casual. "Jaden," Marcus said, his tone serious, "there's been an incident with your dad and Ryan." I sighed. "What happened now?" "Ryan's been stealing from the company," Marcus said bluntly. I froze. "Wait, what?" Over the next few minutes, Marcus laid it all out. Ryan had been skimming money from client accounts for months, thousands of dollars, and to make matters worse, Mark had vouched for him when he got hired. Now the company was looking into whether Mark was involved too. "Are you serious?" I asked, struggling to process it. "Dead serious," Marcus replied. "I haven't reported them to the authorities yet. Out of respect for your mom, I wanted to give them a chance to make it right. But if they don't pay back what they owe soon, I won't have a choice." I was stunned, but not entirely shocked. Ryan had always been entitled, always pushing boundaries. And Mark? He'd spent his whole life enabling Ryan's behavior. It was just a matter of time before it caught up with them. "Thanks for letting me know," I said. "What do you think they're going to do?" Marcus sighed. "Honestly, I don't think they'll take it seriously until it's too late." Sure enough, it didn't take long for Mark and Ryan to come crawling. A few days later, they showed up at Ruth and James's house unannounced. I was in the middle of studying when Ruth called me into the living room. Her tone was clipped. "Your dad's here." When I walked in, Mark and Ryan were sitting on the couch, looking desperate. Ryan's usual smugness was gone, replaced with an anxious energy that made him look like a kid caught stealing cookies. Mark, on the other hand, looked tired, like he'd aged 10 years since I last saw him. "Jaden," Mark started, his voice shaky, "we need your help." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. "With what?" "It's about Marcus," Ryan jumped in. "You're close to him, right? He likes you. He trusts you." "Yeah, so?" I replied, already seeing where this was headed. Ryan hesitated, glancing at Mark for backup. "We need you to talk to him," Mark said. "Convince him this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe tell him the money was for your college fund or something." I blinked, stunned. "You want me to lie for you?" "It's not lying," Mark said quickly. "It's bending the truth. We're family, Jaden. Family helps each other." I let out a bitter laugh. "Funny, because I don't remember you helping me when you threw me out to make room for Ryan." Mark had the audacity to look hurt, like I was the bad guy in this situation. "That was different," he said weakly. "This is serious. If Marcus doesn't believe us, we could go to jail." I stared at them for a long moment, taking in the desperation on their faces. Then I said the one thing they didn't want to hear. "No." Their reactions were priceless. Ryan turned red, his jaw tightening like he was trying not to explode. Mark stammered, searching for words to guilt-trip me. "Jaden, please," he begged. "Don't do this. You're my son." I shook my head. "You've never acted like my dad. I'm not going to help you." I walked out of the room, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand. But Mark wasn't about to let it go that easily. After I turned Mark and Ryan down, I thought that was the end of it. They'd gotten their answer, and I assumed they'd move on to whatever scheme they'd cook up next. But no, Mark wasn't about to let me off that easily. It started with a text the next morning from an unfamiliar number. "Mark, Jaden, this is serious. We really need to talk. Please call me." I rolled my eyes and ignored it. Then he started calling. First from his own phone, then from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't pick up. The voicemails were all the same. Guilt trips, desperate pleas, and the classic family helps family line that he apparently thought was going to work. Eventually I blocked him, but Mark wasn't done. When he couldn't get through to me, he tried going through Ruth and James. One evening, Ruth called me into the kitchen, her expression tight. "Your father left a message on the landline," she said, her voice laced with annoyance. "What did he say?" I asked, already bracing myself. "He wants us to convince you to help him," Ruth replied. "He says they're in big trouble, and you're the only one who can fix it." I let out a bitter laugh. "Fix it? He's delusional." "Agreed," Ruth said firmly. "Whatever mess they've made, it's not your responsibility, and it's certainly not ours." I nodded. I had no intention of getting involved, and Ruth and James made it clear they'd back me up. But Mark wasn't the only one trying to pull me back into the chaos. A few days later, Ryan decided to try his luck. He showed up at Ruth and James's house while I was at work. When I got home, Ruth filled me in. "That boy has no shame," she said, shaking her head. "He came here all smug, thinking he could charm us into convincing you to help." "What did he say?" I asked, almost amused. "He claimed the whole thing was a misunderstanding," Ruth replied. "Said Marcus was overreacting and that you could clear things up if you just talked to him." "And what did you say?" "I told him to leave before I called the police," Ruth said with a huff. "I'm too old to deal with this kind of nonsense." I couldn't help but laugh. Ruth was a force to be reckoned with, and Ryan clearly hadn't been prepared for that. Still, their persistence was starting to get under my skin. It wasn't just annoying, it was insulting. Did they really think they could guilt me into risking my own future for their crimes? Meanwhile, Marcus and I stayed in touch. He'd call every so often to update me on the situation. According to him, Mark and Ryan were scrambling. They'd promised to pay back the stolen money, but hadn't delivered a single cent. I've given them every opportunity to fix this, Marcus said during one of our calls. But they're not taking it seriously. If they don't come up with the money soon, I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities. Do what you have to do, I told him. They made their bed. Marcus sighed. I know, Jaden. It's just frustrating. Your mom always tried to see the best in people, and I guess I'm trying to honor that. But there's only so much I can do. Hearing him talk about my mom hit me harder than I expected. She was the glue that held our family together, the one who always believed people could change. But Mark and Ryan had taken her kindness for granted, and they didn't deserve Marcus's patience, or mine. The breaking point came when Mark showed up at Ruth and James's house himself. I wasn't home at the time, but Ruth called me as soon as it happened. Your father has some nerve, she said, her voice dripping with anger. He barged in here uninvited, demanding to speak with you. What did you do? I asked, half expecting to hear she'd thrown something at him. I told him to leave, Ruth replied. When he refused, I called Marcus. Wait, you called Marcus? Yes, Ruth said firmly. I told him what your father was doing and asked if he could step in. Marcus said he'd handle it. I didn't know whether to laugh or be impressed. Ruth wasn't playing around, and apparently, neither was Marcus. A few days later, Marcus called me with an update. I spoke to your father, he said. I made it clear that his behavior is unacceptable. If he contacts you or your grandparents again, he'll face legal consequences. I felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone was holding Mark accountable. Thanks, Marcus, I said. I really appreciate it. Don't thank me yet, Marcus replied. Your father's not out of the woods. If they don't pay back the money, I'll have no choice but to file charges. That wasn't my problem, though. As far as I was concerned, Mark and Ryan were on their own. You'd think after Marcus laid down the law, Mark and Ryan would finally start cleaning up their mess. But instead, they doubled down on their stupidity, trying to scheme their way out of the hole they dug for themselves. It was honestly pathetic. I'd already blocked Mark and Ryan on everything, and warned Ruth and James to be on the lookout for more nonsense. I was focused on moving forward, but even when you try to leave drama behind, it has a way of finding you, especially when Mark and Ryan are involved. A week later, Marcus called me with news that made my jaw drop. Jaden, he said, his tone somewhere between exasperation and amusement, I've uncovered more about your brother. I sighed. Do I even want to know? Marcus chuckled dryly. Probably not, but here it is anyway. Ryan wasn't just skimming money from client accounts. He was also using the company credit card for personal expenses. Oh, for the love of... I trailed off, already laughing at the absurdity. What was he buying? Luxury items, Marcus replied. Watches, designer clothes, even a set of golf clubs. He's been living like he's still making six figures. I couldn't help but laugh. It was classic Ryan, entitled, oblivious, and reckless. Not only had he been stealing, but he'd been flaunting it like he was the star of some reality show. Marcus, I said, once my laughter subsided, you've been way too patient with them. It's time to make a move. I agree, Marcus said. I've given them every chance to make things right, but they've ignored every warning. It's time to take this to the next level. I didn't have to ask what that meant. Marcus was gearing up to file charges, and I couldn't blame him. Mark and Ryan had treated his generosity like a blank check, and now they were about to face the consequences. But as satisfying as it was to see karma catching up to them, a part of me felt like it wasn't enough. For years, they'd made my life miserable. They'd walked all over me, acted like I didn't matter, and expected me to just take it. It was time for them to understand what it felt like to be on the receiving end. That's when I had an idea. Ryan had always been obsessed with his image. He wanted people to think he was successful, charming, and untouchable. The truth, of course, was the opposite. So I decided to hit him where it hurt the most, his reputation. Step 1 was gathering evidence. Marcus had already shared some of the details with me, but I knew there was more out there. With his blessing, I started digging. I found old emails, expense reports, and even a few social media posts where Ryan had bragged about his business success while posing with items he'd clearly bought with stolen money. The dude couldn't help himself. Step 2 was telling the story, not publicly, but to the people who needed to know the truth. First on my list was Olivia. Now, Olivia and I were never close, but I'd always felt bad for her. She married Ryan thinking she was getting Prince Charming, only to end up with a freeloading con artist. I figured she deserved to know the full extent of his lies. I sent her a carefully worded email with all the receipts. It didn't take long for her to reply. Olivia, thank you for telling me this. I knew Ryan was struggling, but I had no idea it was this bad. Logan and I are staying with my parents now. I don't think we'll be coming back. Well, that was one bridge burned. Ryan's family was officially out of the picture. Next on my list were some of Ryan's old friends, the ones who used to cheer him on like he was the second coming of Elon Musk. I figured they'd be interested to know the truth, so I sent a few anonymous messages with links to the evidence. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days, Ryan was a pariah. His friends stopped returning his calls, his social media accounts went dark, and word started spreading through the family. Of course, Aunt Karen was the first to call me about it. "Jaden, have you heard about Ryan?" she asked, her voice dripping with excitement. "Yeah, I've heard," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "Well, let me tell you, everyone's talking about it. He's ruined, Jaden, absolutely ruined." I could hear the glee in her voice, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. For once, it felt like the universe was on my side. Meanwhile, Marcus officially filed charges against Mark and Ryan. The legal process was slow, but the damage was already done. Mark lost his job, his reputation, and most of his friends. Ryan, on the other hand, was scrambling to figure out how to pay back the stolen money, and failing spectacularly. Ruth and James, ever the voices of reason, reminded me not to dwell too much on their downfall. "Focus on your own success, Jaden," Ruth said one evening. "That's the best revenge you can have." She was right, of course, but I couldn't help feeling a little satisfied knowing that Mark and Ryan were finally facing the consequences of their actions. After Marcus filed the charges, it felt like a storm had finally started to calm. Mark and Ryan were scrambling to save themselves, but the fallout was unavoidable. The legal system moved slowly, but Marcus assured me they were facing an uphill battle. In the meantime, I focused on my own life. Living with Ruth and James had given me the stability I needed to thrive. With their support, I kept up with my part-time job, saved for college, and started planning for the future. For the first time in years, I felt free from Mark and Ryan's shadow. But of course, the chaos wasn't entirely over. One day, Marcus called me again, his tone as calm as ever, but with an edge of finality. "Jaden," he said, "there's more." I groaned. "More? What now?" "Well, it turns out Ryan wasn't just stealing money and flaunting it. He also lied about his qualifications when he applied for the job. I found forged documents, fake degrees, fake references. The guy built his career on lies." I let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's bold, even for him." Marcus chuckled dryly. "Bold isn't the word I'd use, but yes. The lies are unraveling fast, and now the authorities are digging deeper into Mark's involvement." It was the nail in the coffin. With Ryan's lies exposed and the stolen money still unpaid, their house of cards collapsed entirely. For Mark, it meant complete humiliation. He was forced to step down from every community position he'd ever held, cut ties with friends who'd once admired him, and sell off personal belongings to stay afloat. Ryan, on the other hand, was worse off. Marcus kept me updated on the case, and it became clear that Ryan wouldn't be able to pay back what he'd stolen. The charges against him were severe enough to carry jail time, and there was no longer anyone willing to cover for him. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward. Thanks to Marcus, I landed a paid internship at his company, giving me valuable experience and a solid financial boost for college. Ruth and James continued to be my rock, cheering me on every step of the way. "You've come a long way, Jaden," Ruth said one night as we sat in the kitchen. "Your mom would be so proud." Hearing that brought a lump to my throat. My mom had always been my biggest supporter, even when Mark and Ryan tried to make me feel like I didn't belong. Knowing that I was finally building the life she'd wanted for me felt like a victory in itself. I couldn't help but reflect on how much things had changed. Mark and Ryan had spent years tearing me down, but in the end, their own actions were their undoing. They'd created the mess, and they were the ones left to deal with it. A few weeks later, Marcus called with the final update. "It's over, Jaden," he said simply. "Ryan's been sentenced. He'll serve a few years in prison, and Mark, well, he's being watched closely, but he's managed to avoid charges for now." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Thanks, Marcus, for everything." "Don't mention it," Marcus replied. "You deserve better, and I'm glad I could help. Your mom would have wanted that." His words stuck with me. I didn't need revenge or karma to feel fulfilled. I just needed to focus on the people who cared about me and the life I was building for myself. As for Mark and Ryan, I let them fade into the background, their drama no longer my problem. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and I'm finally living it on my own terms. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that you can't control the way people treat you, but you can choose how you respond. For years, I was their scapegoat, their punching bag, their afterthought. But now, I'm so much more. I'm stronger, wiser, and ready to take on whatever comes next. And honestly, that's the best revenge I could ever ask for. Story 2. The title of this article is "My Ex-Wife Cheated." My parents supported her, and even went to her wedding to the man she had an affair with. They're pleading with me to forgive them now that she has defrauded them, but I'm done. Hello everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Thus, my former spouse betrayed me. After she betrayed them as well, my parents, who supported her, now seek my assistance. Not at all. Not taking place. First, let me tell you the backstory. I met Amanda when I was a 29-year-old guy, 27-year-old ex-wife, women. She seemed like a dream come true to me. Anyone might feel as though they were the most important person in the room, because to her flawless combination of charm and confidence, she had ambition. She talked about her ambitious professional objectives and had a contagious zeal that inspired me to improve for her. My folks, of course, adored her. Why wouldn't they, after all? Even if it was really an act, Amanda had a remarkable talent for making others love her. It seemed as though my parents, Linda and Ron, had taken Amanda in as their own daughter from the first time I presented her to them. When I found someone like her and my dad, my mom would tell me how fortunate I was. He pretended that Amanda was unaffected by anything. They had never been this excited about any of my previous partnerships. In hindsight, I should have seen that as a red flag. However, I thought it was fantastic that everyone got along at the time. Amanda was a cunning person. Her charisma wasn't the only thing that won my folks over. In a calculated move, she became essential to them. She would bring them small presents, remember their birthdays, and talk to my mom for hours about her aspirations to start a family. She would impress my dad in the meanwhile by requesting advice on investing or her 401k, which didn't exist. They were nearly pleading with me to lock it down with her by the time we became engaged. At first, I didn't mind my parents' attention to Amanda. It was satisfying to know they agreed. But as time went on, I became aware of something disturbing. My parents began to support Amanda in every way. Even if we couldn't agree on what to eat for supper, where to live, or even how to decorate, without fail, my parents would support Amanda. They like you, that's all. One evening, when Amanda made a joke about how much my mother cared over her, I informed her. "Well, maybe you should listen to them more," she remarked with a sly smile. That remark lingered with me even though I shrugged it off. Once we were married, the true problem began. Amanda started to subtly convey how much she detested her work. Her employer and her long hours were the only things she complained about at initially. Then it also got more intense. I wish I could only concentrate on being a wife and providing for our family. She made it seem admirable, as if giving up her career was a sacrifice for our marriage's betterment. The idea didn't appeal to me. I had been raised to think of marriage as a partnership. I assumed Amanda and I would work, just as my parents did, to support our family. However, Amanda would always use the big guns whenever I hesitated. My folks, I spoke with your mother today. I am fortunate to have a husband who can provide so well, she said casually. She advised me to take a break from my work if I so desired. In fact, my mother was completely in favor of it when I brought it up to her. Amanda is right. At dinner one evening, my mother said, "If you can support the two of you, why should she worry?" "Happy wife, happy life, son," my dad added. "You'll be happy if Amanda is happy." They dismissed me as though I were being irrational when I attempted to explain that I didn't feel comfortable being the only provider. "All she wants to do is look after you," my mom said, completely ignoring the fact that Amanda had never cooked a meal or cleaned a bathroom in her life. After months of pressure from Amanda and my parents, I finally gave in. I told myself it was temporary, that Amanda would get bored and go back to work eventually. But deep down I knew I was being played. Amanda quit her job the very next day. She didn't even give notice. I came home to find her lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she'd been doing it her whole life. When I asked what she'd done all day, she shrugged and said, "Relaxing. I needed this." That was the beginning of the end. My parents, meanwhile, acted like Amanda had made the ultimate sacrifice by quitting her job. They praised her for putting our marriage first, and constantly reminded me how lucky I was to have a wife like her. What I didn't realize at the time was that Amanda wasn't just manipulating me. She was manipulating my parents too. She had them wrapped around her finger, and they were more than happy to back her up, even when it came at my expense. Looking back, I can see how Amanda set the stage for what would come later. She knew exactly how to pit me against my parents, making me look like the bad guy while she played the innocent, supportive wife and my parents. They fell for it every time I was too blind or maybe too naive to see the trap I was walking into. But I've always had that feeling that something's off. Once Amanda quit her job, I hoped things would even out. I figured, okay, she's taking some time to settle into this homemaker role she talked about. I assumed she'd use the time to manage the house, cook some meals, maybe take up hobbies that didn't involve scrolling through Instagram for hours. I was mistaken, boy. It didn't take long for reality to hit me like a freight train. Amanda wasn't interested in being a homemaker. She wanted to be royalty. Chores. Not her thing. Cooking. She once made spaghetti with jarred sauce, called it a gourmet effort, and expected me to rave about it. Cleaning. "That's why we have a vacuum," she'd reply, conveniently ignoring that someone has to push the item around instead. Amanda regarded her days like an extended vacation. She spent her mornings sipping pricey coffee that she demanded I buy before going for work. By afternoon, she was on the couch, binge-watching reality TV or scrolling through her phone like it was her full-time work. The lady might spend hours taking a selfie, tweaking it with filters, and publishing it with sentiments like "life is lovely when you're loved and supported." Supported. More like sponsored. And let's not forget about the spending. Without her salary, every dime was going out of my pocket, and Amanda had no notion of budgeting. She had a way for convincing me we needed stuff. "This new throw blanket is crucial for the living room feel," she'd say, flashing a $200 price tag in my face. Or "I saw this drink subscription. That's completely worth it. We deserve to reward ourselves." I began to suggest that perhaps she might contribute more. I wasn't requesting a complete makeover a la Martha Stewart, just a little work. However, Amanda changed the subject each time I raised it. "You now regret allowing me to resign from my position? You promised to help me. You would have held that over my head if I had known." No, I wouldn't have. I was unable to move. I was unsupportive if I resisted. I would grow more resentful of her every day if I remained silent. However, Amanda's actions weren't even the worst part. My parents were involved. They always pretended that Amanda had done nothing wrong when I expressed my dissatisfaction to them. "She's simply getting used to it." "Give her some time," my mother would say. "Homemaking is more difficult than it seems, more difficult than it appears." Ever since she quit her work, Amanda has not cleaned the home. Just to keep up with the mounting credit card debt from her shopping binges, I was working extra hours in the meantime. My father was no better. One time when I vented to him, he remarked, "You're exaggerating. Amanda is a decent lady. All she needs is your help. Give up bugging her." It enraged me. My parents weren't simply brushing off my worries. Amanda's conduct was being deliberately encouraged by them. Amanda would go to my mom if I attempted to address the imbalance in our marriage or establish limits, and my mom would turn it into a tirade about how I needed to be more understanding. The house was in utter disarray when I returned home one evening, following an especially difficult workday. Amanda was splayed out on the couch with her phone, clothes was scattered over the living room, and dirty dishes were stacked in the sink. When I stepped in, she didn't even raise her head. "A difficult day?" I asked, attempting to control my fury. "Yes," she responded with a loud sigh. "I've been attempting to determine which filter would work best for this article. It's draining." I looked at her in anticipation of her laughing or acknowledging that she was kidding. She didn't. "I really lost it, Amanda. The house is in disarray, and Instagram filters are causing you anxiety?" She gave an eye roll. "Tomorrow I'll clean. Never begin with me." It has been a long day. Amanda's favorite justification was that. It has been a long day. A long day. What precisely are you doing? I was working really hard at my job to support us. Furthermore, she was too tired to fill a dishwasher. Later, when we were both more at ease, I promised myself I would discuss it with her. However, the following day, before I had a chance at all, the ultimate power move was executed by Amanda. She involved my parents. She had apparently contacted my mom that morning in tears, complaining that I didn't value her and that I was always praising her work. My mother had left me a message by the time I arrived at work, lecturing me about how I needed to improve as a spouse. She responded, "You must stop being so harsh on Amanda. She is making every effort. All you're doing is making her feel undervalued." Not valued. What precisely was I meant to value? She left a mess everywhere. The reality that I was pushing myself to the bone while supporting her slack lifestyle. The worst thing was that Amanda had forged an unholy alliance against me with my parents. She would summon them for support whenever we got into a fight, and they would come to her aid, as if she were a fragile flower in need of defense from her large, violent husband. Compromise is key in marriage. One evening, after Amanda had complained to him about me, my dad stated, "Give Amanda time to sort things out if she needs it. Work things out." Instead of playing this one-sided game where Amanda pretended to be busy while I worked, we were meant to be creating a life together. A few weeks later, Amanda's insistence that we employ a home cleaning marked a turning point. "I'm overwhelmed, and you're obviously too busy to clean," she remarked. "It will benefit both of us." I thought she was kidding, so I laughed. "What's overwhelming you?" Captions on Instagram. Her expression became solemn. "Whoa, you're just being cruel now. What do you know? I might go spend a few days with your mother. I'm at least appreciated by her." She also did. After packing her bags, Amanda spent the weekend at my parents' house, receiving royal treatment. That Saturday, my mother gave me another reprimand over the phone, telling me how fortunate I was to have Amanda and how I needed to be a better husband. She is a remarkable woman. "You should be thankful that my mother is willing to put up with you," she said. I thought about that line for days. For what are you grateful? Amanda had succeeded in making my parents her own supporters, and regardless of what I did, I was the villain. No matter how hard I worked or how much I contributed, it made no difference. I was failing as a spouse because I dared to demand anything in return, according to Amanda and my parents. It was then that I began to see the extent of Amanda's manipulation. She wasn't looking to take advantage of my efforts. Because I didn't let her get away with it, she wanted me to feel bad, as well as my parents. They were delighted to assist her in keeping me in line. This was only the beginning, even if I was unaware of it at the time. It was about to get a whole lot worse. Amanda and I had already reached a breaking point, but I kept telling myself it was only a difficult time. You do realize that every marriage has its ups and downs. I reasoned that perhaps if I put forth more effort, spoke more effectively, or just gave her more time, things would get better. However, Amanda had no desire to make any improvements. She spent too much time honing her act. A few months after she quit her work, I began to notice that she was acting strangely. She couldn't take her eyes off her phone. Let's be honest, I didn't give it much thought at first. Nowadays, everyone spends too much time on their gadgets. Amanda, however, wasn't only mindlessly browsing. When I passed by, she would swiftly lock her screen, giggle at texts, and occasionally even leave the room to answer calls. I arrived home from work late one evening. The house was a catastrophe zone as usual. On the sofa table are empty takeaway cartons. Amanda was sitting on the couch with her phone hooked to her hand while the laundry was heaped up. She only gave me a half-hearted hello as I stepped in, hardly acknowledging me. "What's dinner?" I inquired, dropping my bag. She didn't even raise her head. "I didn't cook since I didn't know when you would come home." I yelled that I hadn't cooked anything. "I've been working all day, Amanda. You should at least prepare dinner." When she did glance up, she rolled her eyes. "Ethan, I'm not your maid. There is a frozen pizza in the freezer if you would want dinner." Even though I was worn out, angry and about to lose it, I controlled myself. Instead, while Amanda sat on the couch laughing at her phone, I reheated the stupid pizza and ate it by myself. Something broke inside of me that night. I began to observe her conduct more closely. It was more than simply entitlement or sloth. It was her newfound secrecy. She never left her phone alone and kept it on mute. She would give me an evasive response if I questioned what she was doing, such as simply talking with friends or browsing amusing memes. She went out on a Saturday morning to have coffee with a buddy. This wasn't out of the ordinary. I was glad for a few hours of peaceful time, and Amanda liked her ladies' time, but she seemed exceptionally happy when she returned. With a broad smile on her face and her phone in hand, she entered while singing a tune. "Good coffee?" I inquired. "The finest," she remarked with a phony-looking smile. I then got to work excavating. A few days later, Amanda was taking a shower and left her phone on the kitchen counter. She wouldn't normally hide it, so this was my opportunity. I paused, telling myself not to pry into her personal space. Then I remembered all the warning signs I had been ignoring. I required clarification. I grabbed her phone and opened it. I was aware of her passcode. Yes, I spotted that when I went directly to her messages. A series of texts from a Jake-like person. Jake keeps thinking about the previous evening. Amanda. The same is true here. I feel so alive because of you, Jake. When will we be able to meet again? Amanda. I swear soon. I just need to keep Ethan away from me. The earth seemed to have been torn out from under me. I had a racing heart. I was having trouble processing what I was reading because my hands were shaking. She had likely been unfaithful to me for months, and not just on the basis of the communication's emotional impact. They had clearly been meeting face to face. I read more of their disgusting conversations as I browsed through their chat. Amanda had complained to Jake that I was monotonous, work-focused, and always bugging her. She portrayed herself as the victim, as if I were a despot who didn't value her. She was living off of my labors in the meantime, slandering me behind my back and skulking around with another man. I was waiting for Amanda in the living room when she emerged from the shower. I was holding her phone. "What is this?" I asked, displaying Jake's messages on the screen. For a brief moment, her face became pallid. Then, as if she believed she could talk her way out of it, she grinned. "It's not what you think, Ethan. Don't." I lost my temper. "Please don't disparage my intelligence." "Amanda, I read it all. I am aware of your infidelity." The grin on her face turned into a frown as she crossed her arms. "Well, perhaps I wouldn't have had to search elsewhere if you had given me more attention." Her boldness astounded me. She wasn't denying it at all. She was accusing me. "Is that your justification?" I fired back. "I put forth a lot of effort to help you, and you mess around with some random man to pay me back." Amanda gave a shrug. "I feel unique because of Jake. You haven't done it in a long time." That was it. I was finished. I told her to leave my house and pack her belongings. I didn't care that she was trying to argue that she had nowhere to go. I didn't care if she stayed with Jake. I can't be kicked out. She let out a scream. "You will never be forgiven by your parents." I gave a sour laugh. "I wish you luck in that endeavor. Amanda, tell them the truth. Now let's see what they think of you." I was unaware that Amanda had no intention of being honest with my parents. Rather, she completely changed the narrative. I believed that I would be able to move on at last after she left. Amanda continued to ruin my life, though. By no means. She wasn't satisfied with simply destroying our union. My family also had to go down with her. What's the worst? A few days after Amanda moved out, they gave her permission. As soon as I replied, my mother called. She was already losing her mind. How could you harm Amanda in this way? She lost her temper. What are you going to do? Sincerely perplexed, I inquired. Expel her. She is devastated. Ethan, she filled us in on everything. Now I thought my mother meant the real deal when she stated everything. I figured Amanda could have told my parents about Jake in an attempt to get them to feel sorry for her. However, no. Amanda's tale was quite different, one in which I was the antagonist. She informed us about your infidelity. With an air of contempt in her voice, my mother went on. How you've been ignoring her emotionally for months. How you spent the night out, most likely with a different woman. How could you have betrayed her in such a way? I needed a moment to even comprehend her words. I was accused of cheating by Amanda. It was nearly astounding in its chutzpah. That was not the case, I said, attempting to remain composed. The one that cheated was Amanda. For months, she has been dating a man named Jake. I've got the evidence. You're making excuses now, I see. My mother retaliated. She has been making every effort to keep your marriage intact, and you simply tossed her out as if she were trash. Ethan, we brought you up better than this. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Without even seeking my opinion, my parents had fallen for Amanda's falsehoods after she totally changed the course of events. She is currently residing with us. Additionally, my mother said, and to be honest, I believe you should apologize to her. For what purpose? Because you were the only one in this mess who wasn't cheating or lying. For putting in extra hours to help a woman who was spending her days messaging another man while lounging on the couch. I was angry, but I knew there was no use in arguing with my mother. Amanda had her utterly enthralled. The situation worsened throughout the course of the following several weeks. My parents had become Amanda's personal army, and they were more than willing to follow her orders. They berated me for destroying the marriage and phoned me all the time. In order to resolve my problems and help Amanda and I get back together, my mother even recommended that I attend therapy. She still has feelings for you. One evening, my mother persisted. She is simply hurt. You're willing to change if you show her. Perhaps you can make things better. Make things better? I was smiling at how effortlessly she had fooled them, and Amanda was living in their home, sleeping in the guest room that I had previously helped remodel. I felt sick to my stomach at the thought of making any amends with her. My parents, however, didn't stop there. They began to include additional relatives in the play. My grandmother, aunts, and cousins all texted and called me, repeating the same garbage about how I had let Amanda down and how disappointed they were in me. She's experienced a lot. It was said by one of my cousins. According to your mother, she sobs herself to sleep every night. She's probably weeping herself to sleep. I answered, straight into Jake's arms, but nobody took me seriously. I was the cold-hearted, unfaithful spouse who had driven Amanda out without cause, and Amanda had portrayed herself as the ideal victim. No matter how many times I attempted to speak the truth or how much proof I had, it made no difference. My family loved it when Amanda played the role better. Fortunately, unlike the rest of this nightmare, the divorce procedure didn't linger on. Before we were married, Amanda and I had signed a prenuptial agreement. Amanda was unable to seize my assets or claim alimony as a result. It separated cleanly and quickly. At first, she attempted to fight it, saying that after everything I had done to her, she was entitled to more. Knowing the prenup was unbreakable, however, her lawyer put an end to it. Less than a month from now, officially we were finished. No more Amanda, no more marriage. I was legally free of her, at least. When I learned a month later that Amanda had wed Jake, it was the last straw. Yes, she had been skulking around with the same guy while I was working extra hours to support her lifestyle. Their wedding took place in a modest courthouse, not very fancy. The actual shock, however. My parents were present. Of all places, Facebook is where I learned about it. With the comment, wishing Amanda all the happiness she deserves, my mom shared a photo of Amanda and Jake smiling. To us, she is like a daughter, and we will always be there for her. I was simmering with rage as I gazed at the television. After everything she had done, lied, cheated, and tarnished my reputation. They were standing by her. I immediately phoned my mother. "You attended the wedding of Amanda?" I questioned, my voice trembling with rage. "We did, of course." As though that were the most apparent thing in the world, she answered. "Ethan, we still consider Amanda family. We don't have to shut her out of our life just because you couldn't make your marriage work." What I was hearing was unbelievable. "Is she really more important to you than your own son?" She said. "We're not picking anyone." Her voice was gratingly quiet. "We just believe that Amanda deserves to be happy, and we will not allow your resentment to overshadow her feelings." From the woman who had taken in my unfaithful ex-wife and treated her like a saint, that was a lot of money. I made the decision to stop at that point. I've finished attempting to explain myself. Completed. Attempting to regain the support of the family that had abandoned me so readily. Completed. Being used as an excuse for Amanda's deception. Although it was difficult, severing relationships was essential. I banned my parents' phone numbers, stopped attending family gatherings, and unfollowed them on social media. Sincerely, I no longer needed their approval, and I knew they would never acknowledge their mistakes. They had fallen in love with Amanda, but she was no longer my issue. Let them handle her lies and tantrums. Allow them to witness the reality for themselves. Because they would eventually. There is a limit to how long someone like Amanda can maintain the charade. For my part, I began concentrating on starting again. I threw myself into my career and interests after receiving therapy that helped me comprehend the betrayal. With time, the bitterness and fury subsided and was replaced by a feeling of relief. I was free. Free from my parents, and free from Amanda. I was free of the poisonous loop that had held me down for years. After a while, I began to move on. I met Sophie at that point. We met at a modest dinner gathering through mutual acquaintances. At the time, I wasn't seeking a relationship, even though I still carried a lot of emotional baggage. Sophia was unavoidable. She was intelligent, humorous, and exuded a sincere warmth that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was the first time in a long time that I felt comfortable letting my guard down, even though our first date consisted of only coffee and a stroll in the park. Sophia had no interest in manipulation or games. She was simply authentic. My confidence improved as our connection did. I was in a collaboration, not a performance, for the first time. Sophia urged me to be authentic. Imperfections and everything. He didn't think twice about calling me out when I resorted to my old habits of attempting to satisfy anyone other than myself. I knew the wedding preparations would be challenging when Sophia and I became engaged. Not due to her. She was as laid back as they come, but my folks would inevitably make trouble. Initially, I contemplated inviting them or not. The more I considered it, the more I realized that perhaps this was the olive branch we needed to mend things. They were unworthy of being a part of this new phase of my life. They made up their minds. One evening, as we were sitting on the sofa together, I informed Sophia, "They choose Amanda over our family, over the truth, and over me. I will not allow them the opportunity to sabotage this." Sophia gave a nod. "Ethan, I simply want you to be content. We, not they, are the focus of this day." Naturally, news of the wedding spread since families like mine are not kept in the dark. Once more, my mother called and left voicemails full of crocodile tears and guilt trips. "Where are your parents, Ethan? Were you unable to extend an invitation to your wedding? Family is family." I didn't answer. My dad then attempted the traditional tough love method. In one voicemail, he remarked, "You're being ridiculous. Sophia has a right to understand the value of family. And by keeping us out, you're denying her that." Well done, Dad. Even members of the extended family participated. I received a lengthy Facebook message from my aunt telling me that I had to let the past go, since life is too short to harbor resentment. None of them knew, or cared to know, that this had nothing to do with resentment. It was to keep me at ease. My parents had repeatedly demonstrated to me that they preferred Amanda's falsehoods than my reality. How come I would offer them a front-row ticket to one of my favorite days ever? Sophia and I were married just the way we had envisioned. Little, personal, and drama-free. Their friends, who had been with me during my worst moments, were the ones who mattered. relatives who had paid attention to what I had to say. Additionally, Sophia's parents treated me as though I had been a member of their family for years. My parents' absence was more than simply apparent. For the first time, it was freeing. I didn't experience the pain of their criticism or the weight of their expectations. Without the burden of my past looming over us, I could relish the moment and cherish the love Sophia and I had developed. I felt like we were coming to an end as we exchanged vows. I was unaware of the treachery, my parents, and Amanda's desire for me. All of them belonged to a chapter that I had at last concluded. Through a relative, I learned after the wedding that my dad had accused me of being selfish for not inviting them, and my mom was upset. However, their views were no longer relevant. I had created a life. Being surrounded by individuals who truly cared about me made me feel proud. My parents were free to tell the narrative the way they saw fit, the one in which I was the bad guy and Amanda was the victim. I didn't want to rewrite it for them, allow them to remain in their delusions. I was too preoccupied with being honest. Story 3. This narrative has a title. Every Christmas, my family made me watch their children while they enjoyed themselves and celebrated. However, I told them last year that I was done, and now they are upset. Hello everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Hello everyone. This is the narrative of my life. Or at least the realization that I was viewed as an accessory by my family. They neglected to go back to the shop. Despite being the youngest of 3, I am not the family's pampered baby, way. It's more like we were unaware that we were feeling the same thing. My 2 elder siblings, they were essentially our house's royal family. Me? They neglected to invite me, the intern, to meetings. My parents were tired of being parents by the time I was born. Since I'm attempting to keep this secret, and because my siblings don't merit fancy nicknames, let's call them the eldest and middle. We're much older already. I was 10 years older than the oldest, who was 12. In other words, they were learning to drive while I was learning to walk. They were figuring out makeup and boyfriends while I was working out crayons. You saw the image. The noise level in our home was not that of a lighthearted family sitcom. It was noisy with the oldest, who either received straight A's once more or was promoted to cheer captain. In the meantime, I'm sitting there thinking, hey, I spelled every word correctly this week. Does anyone give a damn so? Of course not. I recall the oldest once bringing her first boyfriend home. He shook Dad's hand like he was signing a mortgage and had spiky hair that shouted early 2000 emo. This guy, who smelled like too much Axe body spray, captivated me as I peered over the banister. Within a year, Middle was dating her first boyfriend. I was the bored audience with nothing better to watch, and it seemed like I was seeing a real-life drama unfold. They were my parents' obsession. I only half-heartedly finished your homework, honey, while Mom spent hours helping the oldest choose prom outfits. She passed me on her way to talk to Middle about college applications. At supper, Dad would light up when he announced the eldest SAT results or the Middle's most recent tier competition. I'm moving peas about my plate in the meantime, wondering whether anyone saw me, but they didn't. It felt like Christmas and New Year's had blended into one enormous party when the oldest daughter was accepted to her ideal university. Breakfast is pancakes, balloons, the process. Knowing that nobody was going to throw a celebration, I sat at the table and ate my sticky pancake of melancholy. 2 years after I got involved, Middle went for college, and all of a sudden I was the only child living at home. You would think that I would at last receive some attention, wouldn't you? False. They still had a sense of ownership over the house. Time stood still in their chambers. Homages to their heyday, pictures and trophies. Hair straighteners left over. I could have set their belongings on fire. And it's likely that my parents wouldn't have realized till Christmas. Here's the problem, though. I'm not stupid. I quickly realized that I wasn't the main attraction, so I adjusted. I kept my head down, did my own thing, and avoided trouble. I was an expert at being invisible by the time I was in high school. With everyone's attention fixed on the oldest and middle channel, why even try? Even when I succeeded, it was hardly noticeable. Mom gave me this after I once brought home a report card that was all A's. Distracted. That's lovely, my love. Dad didn't even glance up from the TV as he scrolled through the photos that the oldest had sent of her study abroad vacation. But I became accustomed to it. I didn't really have an option. My plan for survival became clear. Get out of my way and find something to do for myself. I avoided awkward family meals when someone would unavoidably bring up my siblings' accomplishments for the millionth time by reading books, playing video games, and doing absolutely anything else. Did I mention that middle received a full scholarship before anybody else in our family? My parents certainly did, always. I had mastered my ghost act at school by the time I was 15. I was the quiet child who everyone loved but didn't truly know. I was the child that helped out around the house so she wouldn't be scolded. Although it wasn't fantastic, it wasn't awful either. It seemed to me that this was the way things would be until I graduated and left. Oh no, however. There were plans in life, large ones. They also included me, my siblings, and a degree of foolishness for which I was not at all ready. Being unseen was no longer the only thing at stake. This has to do with being a real unpaid nanny. In any case, let's fast forward to the time when indentured childcare replaced invisible siblings. When the oldest had her first child, I was around 15. We'll refer to him as Child 1. I was truly delighted at first. I think babies are adorable. When I first held him, I thought, wow, I'm going to be the fun aunt, teaching him how to play practical jokes and steal cookies before supper. At first, it was lovely. Then one Saturday morning, the oldest arrived with her pocketbook in one arm and the child in the other. She dropped him into my lap, hardly even looking at me. Could you keep an eye on him for a few hours? I have a lot of errands to run. She didn't wait for a response at all. She was saying thank you as she was leaving. You are the greatest. Above her shoulder, 5 hours passed. My current task was to text my buddies who were all having a great time in the mall while simultaneously attempting to figure out how to calm a crying infant. When she returned at last, she pretended that nothing was strange. You mean, woman, he didn't cause you any trouble? I couldn't locate your child's favorite binky, so he wailed in my ear for 3 hours. And it was only the beginning. After that, the oldest would appear out of nowhere with Child 1 every weekend. I require a respite, she would say. Or it's only for a short time. It was errands at times. There were occasions when it was brunch with pals. At times it was just because, as well as my parents. Oh, how encouraging they were. Family is helpful. Family. Mom would say it as if it were an indisputable global fact. When you're older, you'll comprehend. Dad would often say this while watching TV and doing little to assist. Then the middle joined in. A year later, she became pregnant, and when her child was born, it was as if someone had copied and pasted the oldest gibberish. I wasn't just observing Child 1 anymore. I had 2 children running around, a newborn and a hyperactive toddler. I recall being pretty excited about seeing a movie with a friend one Saturday. Middle arrived with the second child, gave her to me, and walked away. As the first child attempted to draw on the walls, I attempted to convey my ideas to the father while he was holding a sobbing infant on one hip. Prior to agreeing to babysit the children, you ought to have considered that. Without barely raising his eyes from his crossword puzzle, he remarked, I felt like screaming. I agree. Nothing was agreed to by me. As usual, they made the decision for me, so don't bother whining to Mom. She just gave me a classic. Quit being self-centered. Your sisters require assistance. When you become a mother, you will comprehend. I could have hired someone else to do this foolishness for me if I had a $1 for each time I heard that statement. By the way, I will not become a mother who places her children in the care of strangers. Weekends turned into a circus act. Weekends turned into a circus act. Imagine this. I'm attempting to assist Child 1 in constructing a block tower, as if he were trying out for Baby Shark, the horror edition. Child 2 screamed bloody murder. I was more than simply an underpaid nanny. The ringmaster of pandemonium was me. I was more than simply an underpaid nanny. They would come over to rant about how difficult being a mother was while I was holding her child so she could browse Instagram. I was their emotional punching bag. Eldest would leave me in charge of diaper duty and sip lattes while complaining about her hectic schedule. The worst thing? Nobody even expressed gratitude. Not once. Not one. Nancy, you are quite remarkable for volunteering your time to allow us to spend a few hours acting as though we are childless. Nothing. More guilt trips, more effort, and more children. I was completely over it by the time I was 17. As if my life were on the line, I began looking at universities. And, to be honest, it did. Not just any college either. I was not going to stay for this bullshit. I required a distant location. Like, it takes a bus and 3 aircraft to get home. Far away. I pushed myself into my studies and achieved the highest marks I had ever had. Freedom was one step closer each day. I nearly broke down when I received my admission letter from a college across the nation. Naturally, though, my relatives had to attempt to spoil it. What makes you want to go so far? Mom scowled as if I had just informed her I was going to join a cult. The program at this community college is excellent. You may save money by living at home. Eldest continued, as if she hadn't imagined me as her live-in nanny. I quickly shut that down. Bless her heart, Grandma made sure I could live independently of my parents by providing for Grandpa's college fund. In all of this, she truly was the MVP. It was like breaking out of prison when packing for college. I was going to live my own life at last. No sobbing children, no critical siblings, and no parents who would use guilt to force me into slavery. Only me, my room, and the opportunity to be a regular person. My dreams of college life came true. The first semester was over quickly. In order to keep myself occupied and stay out of my parents' financial straits, I made friends, joined a study group, and even began working part-time. I felt as though I had been given a reset button for my whole existence, but right when I believed I was safe. The holidays arrived. Apparently, Thanksgiving was mandatory. Mom was already organizing my welcome home when she called a month in advance, as if I were a famous person coming home from a global tour. Nancy, everyone wants to know how you're doing. The children are eager to see you, she chirped. Translation: we need a babysitter. I showed up that year feeling cautiously optimistic. Maybe they'd changed. Maybe they'd miss me enough to treat me like an actual human. The moment I walked through the door, Eldest handed me Kid 1 and Kid 2 like they were handing off bags of groceries. Middle showed up 20 minutes later with her kids and immediately joined Mom in the kitchen, leaving me with the tiny tornadoes. At one point, I caught Dad sneaking a plate of appetizers while I was trying to stop Kid 1 from jumping off the couch. "You're so good with them," he said, like I was auditioning for America's Next Top Babysitter. "Yeah, I'm great," I muttered, trying to fish a crayon out of Kid 2's mouth. That day, I barely ate. By the time I wrangled the kids into their jackets and handed them off to their parents, the adults had already polished off dessert. Mom handed me a plate of lukewarm leftovers, like she was doing me a favor. "Thank you. Nancy, you're such a big help." I wanted to scream instead. I smiled, nodded, and went back to college, vowing never to come home again. But Christmas. Oh, Christmas was another beast completely. Mom's text came in like a surprise. She'd invited everyone, all the kids, cousins, second cousins, neighbors, and maybe the mailman. For all I knew, the message was pouring with enthusiasm. "It'll be so lovely to have the whole family together. The kids are really delighted to meet you." This time I wasn't optimistic. I was angry. I could already see how it would go down. I'd spend Christmas running after 12 kids while everyone else ate, laughed, and traded gifts. Meanwhile, I'd be upstairs cleaning noses and breaking up child fights. Nope, not this year. I decided I needed a plan. I wasn't just going to roll over and take it anymore. No more. Good little Nancy, who silently did what she was taught. I began setting the foundation weeks in advance. My pals were also on board, getting me excited as though I were getting ready for a big battle. "You're capable. Stand your ground and don't let them guilt trip you," one of them said. When Christmas Day finally arrived, I entered the home prepared for combat. The children had already begun to swarm like bees, shrieking over toys and ripping through wrapping paper. The oldest saw me as usual and rushed straight to her youngest, who was already on her hip. She pushed child number 2 into my arms and said, "Oh good, You're here." "No," I said. Eldest blinked. "What?" "No, I'm not watching your kids today," I said. I believed that this was the way things had to be for years. They instill their ideals in you when you're the youngest, you know. Their opinions on what is good and wrong. I was the helpful one, the decent kid, the unseen one. However, the instant I refused, I felt as though a burden had been removed from my chest. I felt like I was doing more than simply getting by for the first time. I was defending my own interests. It was as though I had simply declared that Christmas would not be held. There was no silence in the room because, let's face it, 12 children are never quiet. However, all of the grown-ups paused and gazed at me. Eldest appeared to have been smacked by me. Mid-sip of her coffee, Middle was frozen. Mom even hesitated, holding a platter of cookies as if she wouldn't know whether to set them down or toss them at me. However, who will look after the children? At last, Middle spoke. She spoke in a panic. "Not me," I shrugged. "Like everyone else, I'm here to enjoy Christmas. They're not my children after all." After that, I left the room. As simple as that. I walked to my childhood bedroom, shut the door, and collapsed on my old twin bed. Even though my heart was pounding, I felt liberated. The finest aspect. I had another strategy. I phoned my buddies, who happened to be hanging out that day, and they came over to pick me up. For the remainder of the day, we watched corny Christmas films, played video games, and ate hamburgers. I think that was the nicest Christmas I'd experienced since I was around 5 years old. It was a battle zone when I returned home that evening. I didn't care when Mom gave me a glare that could have melted steel. I had survived the day without contributing to their mayhem in any way. I texted my buddies in my room upstairs. The mission has been completed. Imagine this now. Around 10 a.m., I feel like a queen who has just taken back her kingdom as I roll out of bed. Anticipating awkward stillness, I make my way downstairs, or even a few passive-aggressive remarks. I had a comprehensive intervention. The eldest, Middle, Mom, and Dad were all seated there, appearing to have practiced for this. When Mom lectured us about family values as children, her solemn visage was on display. As if it were the only thing preventing him from losing it, Dad was clutching his coffee. Middle and oldest. Oh, the rage was almost vibrating through them. Eldest was glaring at me like I had kicked a puppy while she held child number 2, who was half asleep and drooling on her sweater. "Good morning?" "Hey, I'm courteous like that," so I said. "Take a seat," Mom replied, sounding theatrical and clipped, as if she were a judge who was going to give me a sentence. The main reason I sat was to observe the direction of this. In that sense, Dad began by telling me about yesterday's events, even though he already knew the answer and only wanted me to acknowledge that I was the worst person alive. "Oh, you're referring to the fact that I declined to watch the 12 children you asked over. Yes, I did decide that for once, I would want to enjoy my Christmas." Leaning back in my chair, I remarked, and Middle instantly jumped in. "Are you even aware of how self-centered that was? All of us relied on you." "Counting on me for what?" she screamed, her voice loud enough to make a child across the room quiver. "To carry out the duties you agreed to when you made the decision to have children," I fired back. And believe me when I say that the chef's kiss caused the oldest's jaw to drop. It was Mom's time to add insult to injury. "Nancy, this isn't how families operate. We support one another. You don't simply quit when things get difficult. You mean I'm the only one who needs to assist?" No one else seemed to be spending Christmas cleaning up juice spills and preventing children from chewing wrapping paper, so I inquired. That's when they started talking over each other. Traditional family mayhem. Eldest was griping about how difficult being a mother of 2 was. Middle was rambling on about the importance of family responsibilities. Additionally, Dad continued to mutter something about respect. Since it was sort of entertaining to see them lose it, I simply sat there and let them vent. I delivered the painful reality to them when they eventually lost steam. "They're your children, you see. It was you, not me, who chose to have them. I'm tired of being your go-to babysitter just because it suits you." The oldest then struck me with her, a big step. "Perhaps you need a lesson in appreciation from someone. Let's see how you handle going to college without your parents' financial support." Yes, she believed she had me. A whole town might have been powered by the arrogant grin on her face, but the true power surge was seeing her face fall when I told her the truth. It felt great to be in charge for once. I simply grinned. I said real casual, actually. Grandma has been using Grandpa's education money to cover my tuition. The same fund that supported you from middle school through business school and nursing school, you know, dead quiet. It was magnificent. Mom only blinked at me as if I had begun speaking in a foreign tongue, and Dad appeared to have eaten a lemon. Eldest's cheeks flushed so much that I feared she could burst. It would have been the icing on the cake, to be honest. I got up, wiped my hands as if I had just ended a long day's work, and said, "Well, I have a life to return to if we're done here." After that, I hurried upstairs, quickly collected my belongings, and walked out without turning around. Of course they attempted to stop me. Dad was claiming I was being theatrical, and Mom was screaming that I was destroying the family. It was a pleasant difference that the middle and oldest were too shocked to speak. Even though the radio was stuck on static, I didn't mind because the journey back to college was so serene. It seemed like a burden was being lifted with each mile that separated me from that house. I felt lighter than I had in years by the time I arrived at my dorm. I banned their numbers as soon as I returned. Each and every one. Mom, Dad, oldest, middle. Lost. I felt as though my brain had been reset. No more family responsibilities or guilt trips. No longer receiving texts in the morning stating that the children were requesting me. They weren't. I was aware that they wouldn't simply ignore it. I didn't care, though. At that time, I had had enough of being a doormat. But items aren't dropped by my family. A few weeks later, it began. One morning, my roommate gave me a piece of mail while appearing perplexed. Nowadays, who even sends letters? She tossed it upon my desk and asked. It was indeed from Mom when I picked it up. Disguised as a "How are you" letter, it's a full-length handwritten guilt trip. This was a masterwork of manipulation, I must say. She was charming at first. "Nancy, you are sorely missed. Without you, the home feels so empty." Then, all of a sudden, I was told how dissatisfied everyone was with my Christmas conduct. It seems that I made them look foolish in front of the whole family. The most amusing aspect? She gave it a casual ending. "You must make amends and offer your sisters an apology. Family endures forever. Yes, forever. Perhaps miserable." I threw the letter in the garbage after crumpling it. Then came the messages. I was receiving random ambiguous messages like, "You need to come home," even though I hadn't disabled the unknown number option. "We've had enough of this. Nancy, we simply want to chat. Let's make this right. You are missed by the children. For this, don't penalize them. Reprimand them. No one was being punished by me." I had recently finished working as their free nanny. However, it was the one from Midway that truly made me giggle. She texted me using a burner number that she somehow obtained. "You cannot simply ignore us indefinitely. Watch me. You're still a member of this family." In any case, after about a month, I believe they have finally moved on. My life is at ease once more. I'm hanging out with my pals, doing well in my studies, and even joining this impromptu debating group. For what reason? However, when February arrives, guess who unexpectedly turns up? Yes, the parents. I was half asleep on a Saturday morning, intending to spend the day in my jammies binge-watching Netflix. They were standing in the dorm parking lot when I looked out the window. Dad had this uncomfortable pose, as if he wasn't sure whether to knock on my dorm door or just shout my name into the air, while Mom clutched her pocketbook like it was a shield. I initially considered acting as though I wasn't home, but I changed my mind and decided to listen to what they had to say instead. I put on a hoodie, went to the lobby, and gave them my best effort. "Face, what are you doing here?" Mom immediately launched into her worried persona. "Nancy, we have been concerned for you. We just called and texted you, but you didn't pick up. We needed to see you." I crossed my arms. "I had nothing to say to you, therefore I didn't respond. All Dad could do was clear his throat. Are you able to buy us coffee?" "Only to converse." "Okay," I reasoned. "Let's listen to them." I got the largest latte I could find as we strolled to the campus cafe. Mostly because I assumed that whatever stupidity was coming will require energy to cope with. After we sat down, Mom began as usual. The events of Christmas have been on our minds a lot. It was strange since Mom is seldom anxious, but she seemed anxious as she traced her finger over the lip of her coffee cup. Dad said, "How much we were asking of you was unknown to us. Or perhaps we didn't want to know." "Hold on, what? I wasn't prepared for this guilt trip." Mom sighed. "We know we've been taking advantage of you, Nancy, for years, and we've been chatting a lot. It was only family, assisting family, we assured ourselves. But you weren't treated fairly. It was completely unfair." I blinked. Did my parents apologize for this? Dad gave a nod. "You are deserving of your own vacation, on your own schedule, to avoid being regarded as a babysitter." Allowing their remarks to linger in my mind for a minute, I took a big gulp of my cappuccino. "How about the sisters?" At last I inquired. Mom's expression tightened. "The oldest. She is, in fact, obstinate. Although she isn't prepared to own her mistake, the middle now sees it. Everything makes her feel awful. I wasn't going to overlook the fact that Middle felt horrible about having to deal with her own children. "What is the strategy here?" I inquired. "You've come this far to apologize to me? What follows?" Mom bent over. "We want you to spend the holidays at home, because you're inclined to. Not because the kids need your assistance. Now, everything will be different, I swear." Dad gave a nod. "Stop imposing obligations on yourself. You are not the family babysitter. You are our daughter." I looked at their faces for a while. Mom had genuine eyes. Dad appeared to have aged by a decade, and they appeared genuine, for the first time in ages, similar to humans, not only those in positions of authority seeking to control my life. "All right," I finally said, "but I'm leaving and won't be returning if I get home and it's the same old bullshit." Mom gave a quick nod. "We understand, of course." That was it. After they went, I spent some time at the cafe trying to take it all in. It was strange. On the one hand, I was glad they understood at last. I wasn't going to let my defenses down entirely, though. Their numbers were unblocked when I returned to my dorm. Middle texted me in 5 minutes. "Little sister, I miss you. This time, for real. For now, that's all. I'll leave you here and perhaps return later to check whether they're being sincere. I appreciate you reading. The last update." "Okay. So we're your free babysitter once more." Things were a little better following that conversation with my folks at the coffee shop. They had apologized after all. He even appeared sincere when he promised to stop treating me like a free nanny. Middle texted a few of times. "I hope all is okay with you." In March, Vibes and I even spent a weekend at home. It wasn't bad. It was a strangely peaceful visit. No children were placed on my lap. Mom even prepared my favorite meal, and I wasn't made to feel guilty about household responsibilities. I wasn't tense for once. Although everything was pleasant, I couldn't get rid of the impression that it was all too wonderful to be true. It turns out that summer break was the tipping point. I had intended to continue working and attending classes on college, but my mother coerced me into spending some time at home. "Nancy, we haven't seen you in a very long time." Conveniently omitting the part where she had already assured Middle and Eldest that she would be home, she continued, "It will be nice to spend time together." I was back in the house I had fought so hard to get out of. It appeared to be all right at first. The kids were rushing about after our lovely supper, but nobody gave them to me as they always do. Hey, perhaps they're finally understanding, I thought. However, after a few days, the oldest arrived with the first and second children. She seemed worn out. "Nancy, hello." As she put her luggage down, she spoke. "I have some errands to run. Could you observe them for a while?" I went cold. After all this, was she serious? Not at all. As calmly as possible, I said. Eldest blinked as if I had just used a foreign tongue. "What are you saying?" "No, it is only for a short time. You don't really have much to do." "I mean, I've stopped doing this," I said, getting to my feet. "You have 2 children. You are in charge of them, not me. Let the fireworks begin." Eldest started shouting about how difficult motherhood is and how family is meant to support you. Midway through the drama, Middle appeared and naturally chose the eldest's side. As if it were WWE, they tag-teamed me. Middle said, "You've changed so much since college." As if that were a negative thing. "You've become so self-centered." "Selfish," I laughed. For years, you have been using me as a free daycare. How is that not self-centered? Mom attempted to intervene by going through her whole, let's calm down routine, but I refused to listen. I remarked, I'm done for real this time, after grabbing my bag and examining each one. Dad said, Don't be dramatic, Nancy, he urged. That's exactly what you say when you know you've lost the debate, let's face it. I turned around and declared, I'm not coming back if you guys can't respect my boundaries, in the most composed voice I could muster. For a period. After that, I left. I did the only sensible thing when I got back to my dorm, blocked their phone numbers once more. Each and every one, even the middle, who had been somewhat superior to the oldest. For the first several weeks, I didn't want to run the chance of any more sporadic texts about guilt trips while I was attempting to study. The silence was too silent. I had assumed that they had finally given up, but I was wrong. Eldest discovered me on social media and sent me a lengthy message about how my absence was damaging the children and destroying the family. Middle said in a different statement that they simply wanted everything to return to normal. The way it was. Do you imply that I'm being treated like an unpaid servant in the family? Hard pass. I disregarded both texts. To be honest, it felt great to block them once more. There has been radio silence ever since. My mother wrote me a final letter in the mail, expressing their love for me and their desire to put things right. Here's the problem, though. It's not necessary to pull me back into the same destructive cycle in order to make things right. Therefore, I'm finished. The toughest and wisest thing I've ever done was to cut ties. And do I feel bad before someone asks? Sometimes a bit. But then I think back to all the years I sacrificed my weekends, holidays, and sanity to care for children that weren't mine, while everyone else went about their lives without feeling guilty. I'm finally living for myself now. And to be honest, it feels really nice. Please share your thoughts in the comments section.